Hey there, it's Tom Ryan, founder and CEO of ICR. Before we get into the next episode, I wanted to ask that you subscribe to the show. It'll help us get even more unique and interesting guests on the podcast and in turn continue to educate management teams and the growing ecosystem that creates value for fast-growing private and public companies. And while you're at it, head over to Apple Podcasts and leave us a 5-star rating. Very much appreciated.
The American industry wants to establish dominance in all these new emerging industries so that we can lead the world in AI, we can lead the world in digital currency, we can lead the world in decentralized systems, we can lead the world in indoor agriculture. That's not going to happen without electricity.
To get large-scale industrial projects off the ground, you need energy, and a lot of it. And in the United States, where we're seeing a massive push to reindustrialize, that represents a huge problem.
The grid is literally failing in front of our eyes.
Being a public company can be hard. Small missteps can have outsized consequences. I'm Tom Ryan, founder and CEO of ICR, and over the last 25 years, we've helped thousands of companies understand and navigate the stock market and the media. We'll demystify these and other increasingly complex stakeholder groups so you can focus on what you do best, building your company and unlocking your true potential. This is Welcome to the Arena from ICR. The world has changed a lot in the last century, but it might surprise you to learn that the U.S. power grid has remained pretty much the same. In this country, energy is by and large controlled by regional utilities with de facto monopolies. That means they have no real incentive to innovate, and that inertia impacts the entire economy as industrial projects are starved of the power they need to get off the ground. Jereme Kent is creating a better way. He's the founder and CEO of One Power Company. Under his leadership, One Power is trailblazing the creation of the customer-centric power grid of the future. Before founding One Power in 2009, Jereme led the construction of some of the world's premier wind projects. He worked for RMT, M.A. Mortensen, D.H. Blantner, and other large-scale utility wind energy contractors. As a field engineer, erection superintendent, and site manager, Jereme has overseen more than $1 billion in wind turbine construction. He attended University of Michigan College of Engineering, Go Blue, where he studied civil engineering with a focus on construction management, and he has several certifications, including being a tower rescue instructor, a crane operator, a critical lift director, and an advanced emergency medical technician. Jereme has actively participated in every step of the process to develop, engineer, procure, construct, operate, and finance wind energy and high-voltage infrastructure projects. Let's enter the arena with Jereme Kent.
Tom, I'm going to put you on the spot. How old are you?
I'm 60.
Okay, so 60 years.
Yep.
Had a long life, done a lot of things, changed over those 60 years.
Yep.
If you went back 60 years today, right now, and looked at the power grid as it existed exactly 60 years ago, almost nothing has changed.
Amazing.
And so if you think about all of the things that have changed in the world from, the internet to fiber optics to all of the abilities we have with computer and machine learning and optimization, and I'm sitting in New York having a podcast with you, remotely over video.
Yeah.
And the power grid hasn't changed. It's still largely a lot of wooden poles. It's still largely a lot of 100-year-old transmission structures. It's still a lot of the same schemes that worked back in 1920 when they were building the modern power grid. And so I think when you realize that that industry is the backbone of everything else that we think of as the modern industry, and everything else that's new and cool is all going to depend on power, the fact that innovation hasn't existed in that industry should scare the heck out of us. It scares the heck out of me. And I think that's why it's exciting to be disruptive in an industry that has never actually had disruption aside from when it was built originally.
You're kind of calling what you do Utility 2.0. Maybe talk about the problems that you're trying to solve for. Obviously, it's an antiquated grid. What are the pain points that kind of you saw in your career where we're like, wow, we can come in and really make this a much more customer-centric experience?
I think you just said the magic words, which are customer and centric. And in any other industry, everybody realizes that is the industry, right? Serve the customer. This is an industry who stopped serving the customer shortly after World War II. This is an industry that has not realize that they could ever lose a customer because they have a monopoly and they're guaranteed that customer.
Yep.
Right? That customer can't just switch. And so, utility 1.0, we talk about it in a lot of ways. We talk about it still being archaic technology and 1910 tech and all of that. But the real reality is utility 1.0 is about the utility companies and their transmission service companies and how great they are. It's not about how are they best serving the customers of today, of the future. It's not about how they're reducing costs for the customer, right? The price of power almost never goes down with time at the retail side. So even when there's wholesale price changes, that never gets passed on to the customers. And then when the power grid goes out and fails, they go, oh, oops. And they, get it back on and go, tough, good luck with your operation.
Tough luck. Yeah.
Right. I mean, you have power lines now around the country where utilities are turning them off because it's windy, because they're afraid they're going to catch a fire because they know they've been so poorly maintained.
Yeah.
How are you supposed to build an economy around that, let alone the next iteration of the economy that we're going into right now? And so when we talk about utility 2.0, it's all about the customer-centric grid of the future. Large industrials built the power grid that we know today. Right. The way the power grid was built, 100 years ago was large factories in the middle of nowhere put in their own generators. They connected their generators to work with other factories who had generators so they could share backups. Then they hooked up all the homes in the middle because they worked for one of them. And it was all about the industrials and what they needed.
Yeah.
Then they gave it all away. And now you have utilities who are fighting to keep it and aren't fighting to serve. And so I think utility 2.0 is about seeing large industrials come in and take back the power grid and say, here's what we need for the thing that is 10, 20, 30, 70% of our operating cost. Here's the predictability. We want cleaner energy, but we also want predictable cost of power. You're seeing all of those things come back in a way where it really is the industrial giant of America has woken back up and realized they got the bad end of the stick on this one.
Obviously, this status quo has been going on forever. Is there something, either technology or in the marketplace, that's like, wow, this is really the perfect time to be doing this?
Yeah. So if you talk about all kind of the big mega trends you're hearing about, right? You talk about AI, you talk about digital currency, you talk about large industrial indoor farming operations as we try to bring more crops back to the US.
Yep.
All of these big new things are some of the largest load centers or consumers of power in the US on the grid, right? A reasonable sized Bitcoin mining operation or a reasonable sized data center is 100 megawatts. 100 megawatts is a good size refinery. And so now you're seeing refinery after refinery after refinery of new load dropping in the grid, and you're seeing essentially the grid break. You're seeing grid operators say, we can't serve you. You're seeing utilities say, we need 5 or 10 years to build out the capacity to serve you, and we have to build new lines, and we aren't sure we can even afford it because we haven't had to invest in ourselves at this scale in so long that we forgot how to do it. And so right now, the reason it's the time and it's, a great time to disrupt and it's frankly necessary is that the grid is literally failing in front of our eyes.
Yeah.
And if the American industry wants to establish dominance in all these new emerging industries so that we can lead the world in AI, we can lead the world in digital currency, we can lead the world in decentralized systems, we can lead the world in indoor agriculture, that's not going to happen without electricity. Energy is the backbone of all of those new things. And now you're going to realize that the 100-year-old grid maybe not be the best thing to serve it.
Yeah. And I would imagine the new administration's tariffs and their belief in onshoring, if that happens, would be another great secular tailwind behind you.
Right. And without getting into the politics side, I'll stick to the engineering side. America doesn't have the power to make everything America needs here right now.
Yeah.
Right. We need more power of all forms. We need more grid. We need more ability to move that power and better use it. So all of those onshoring trends, as well as all this expansion, just forces the engineering problem to a head that the current system is broken.
Yeah. So you rattled off the kinds of customers that you work with. What are the services that you offer?
I tell everybody that all we really do is walk in and say, what do you want? We'll get it for you. And so for some customers, that is, we want to know the price of power in 20 years. We just want predictable fixed rate power for a long-term contract.
Yep.
The way that we do that is by installing on-site behind-the-meter wind energy. We're the largest installer of behind-the-meter on-site wind in the country. But we can give a fixed flat rate for 20 years. You can't do that with other technologies. We have some customers who say they want clean power. Great, wind checks that box too. We have some customers who say, I just need power now so I can start my industrial operation. And so for that, we're doing things with our megawatt hubs where we're taking down power at the scale of 100, 200, 300 megawatts at a time building out the infrastructure on site and operating what you can think of as like a big electrified industrial park and saying, bring your operation to us. We already solved the power problem. We figured out where it was and how to get it and already did all the hard work. You can come do your thing here now. And so our business is all about getting those existing industrials the efficient, cost-effective, cleaner power they want, getting the emerging industrials on the grid now and helping the emerging industrials grow and mature into being large-scale, long-term existing industrials. And so the way we think about our business internally is we have a menu of capabilities. That's from everything from how to build a substation to how to build roads and a foundation to a wind turbine to a solar system to a new interconnect. We have all those skill sets, and all we do is we apply them to solve the unique problem.
Now, I know right now you're kind of regional in Ohio. Does that strategy kind of tether you to a specific geography?
Yeah, I mean, we're in Ohio because that's where the power is, right?
Yep.
The district that we're in Northwest Ohio is one of the most heavily concentrated manufacturing congressional districts in the country, and we serve factories. But the strategy applies everywhere as we expand and as we work our way kind of up into Michigan, out west into Indiana, Illinois, Wisconsin, down towards Texas, right? That's the industrial heartland. That's what we used to call the Rust Belt. That's now the heartland.
Yep.
But the reality is that's where power is made. That's where power is used. That's where most of the factories are. And it also happens to be where a lot of wind is. And so they all align very well. And we end up with this triangle in the middle of the country where we actually make stuff and saying, let's figure out how to make stuff better on the industrial's terms when it comes to power.
Yeah. And I know you describe yourself as vertically integrated. Maybe explain that and why it's so important for your customers.
So I came from the contracting side of the business, right? I was on the side that after all the developers and owners had figured all their stuff out, somebody had to show up and actually build it.
Yep.
And what I learned is the guys who are actually building it, who are actually designing it, are the ones who actually control everything. They control the schedule, the supply chain, the cost, right? They have the ability to do the most good or the most harm for a project. And so if you're trying to do new innovative things and you're dependent on external contractors, you're constantly at the mercy of the markets. You're at the mercy of how much labor there is. You're at the mercy of how good that contractor is. Did you get their A team or their B team? And we don't want to bet our reputation on that. So what we've done is we've brought it all in-house. Everything from the original engineering where we figure out what a site can do and how we can solve the customer's need to how we actually execute on that, to how we then take care of those assets for 20, 30, 40, 50 years. Internally, we like to say that when we make promises, we're also the ones keeping them. We aren't making promises and then trying to go out and find someone to keep them for us.
Yeah, and I read the phrase design one, build many. Is that kind of part of that vertical philosophy and really your competitive edge in the market?
Yeah, so what we realized was trying to build one or two turbines and make money at it and be competitive over and over is not what that industry was set up for. And so what we realized we had to do was figure out how to think past one project. We had to say, what is our standard way of doing things that we would normally customize? So from the way we build a substation to the way we do underground cable to the way that we do a wind turbine or anything else, what we've done is we've said, let's design for the next 100 and let's figure out how to get really good at the same way. And let's always do it the same way. And so when we do it that way, we're able to all of a sudden say, we can make a lot of money because we've now done all of our designing, our tooling, our engineering based on using only this type of bolt, only this type of cable. And I don't have a different cable every job I go to. And so that design one, build many philosophy is how we've been able to bring economies of scale to the construction industry, which historically doesn't have a lot of economies of scale in most parts.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. I'm shocked that more companies design engineering, they don't do it that way. Talk about the digital substations. What do they enable that previously was not possible? Because it's just like basic stuff that I would think like everyone has right now, but they don't, right? That's why you're here.
Yeah, in any other industry, nothing that we did was cool. But in this industry, in the power business, especially the utility business, actually bringing digitization to infrastructure is new and unprecedented.
Amazing.
So what we did is we said, look, like, why aren't these substations all fiber optic? Why are we still designing them with little copper cables to do send signals, right? In most substations you walk into today, Tom, if there's an on switch, it has 2 wires, an off switch, 2 more wires, a second on switch, 2 more wires, an overpressure switch, 2 more wires. Out in the yard, and you have thousands of wires all going back to plug into individual things that then control them.
Yeah.
We're like, what the hell are we doing? So now the way we do it is we set a transformer. It's already factory wired. It's all set up. And we plug in one fiber optic cable like you're hooking up a switch at your house. And all of a sudden, everything can talk. And so just doing that digitization in this industry while making sure it was still the right level of safety and resiliency changes the entire way you build a substation. They're now almost plug and play. Instead of having thousands and thousands of cables, I have 2 fibers per piece of equipment, maybe 4, and they go click, click, click. That's how hard it is to build a substation now.
Amazing. After Liberation Day and the tariffs and all that, the markets obviously reacted poorly. There's a lot of uncertainty. What's your sense on how all of this is going to play out, and what opportunities does this really present for One Power?
So if you step back and just philosophically talk about globalization in an industrial world, you have to get down to what the fundamental industries are. And there are 4 fundamental industries in the world: food, water, raw materials, and energy. And every other industry, every industrial revolution ever has been based on those 4. And so what I think America is learning is that we haven't done a great job at those 4. We are very dependent on other countries for raw materials. We're very dependent on other countries for things that help us in our power supply chain and our ability to have power. We're very dependent even on them for food and for other things that we like to eat. And so all of a sudden, when you try to now have a new industrial boom, or you reshore, or you deglobalize, right, you realize that that supply chain foundation that builds every other industry is now a stressor. And so that's why I think you're going to see more and more people going after, how does the U.S. establish a position of control in those 4 industries?
Yep.
Because back in the original Industrial Revolution, that's why America did so well. It had all 4. And so now you have to go back and get those 4 because we've outsourced too much. And so I think you're seeing more and more people realize that is the risk that breaks everything else resting on top of it.
So we've talked about how One Power's unique model can restore viability to large-scale industrial projects. But one thing we haven't touched on yet is the sustainability piece. Could their approach allow us to build bigger and greener?
Yeah, I think we are seeing more and more customers take the broader view of sustainability that we've taken for a long time. Sustainability is not just about clean. Clean is part of that. Sustainability is about getting long-term predictability in your operations in a way that works in harmony with the broader world. And so knowing the price of power because you have a free and infinite fuel is part of sustainability. And the fact that you can harness that in a clean way that isn't emitting carbon compared to comparables that don't have a fixed price just adds to the sustainability benefit. And so we think the broader, how do you think about factories and their operations across decades? It leads you to a lot of conclusions like free and infinite fuel, like solar and wind and things like that, that allows you to convert to power has clear value, carbon or no carbon in the formula, right? It has value because you know the price of power for 20 years. And that makes your factory more competitive on a global stage.
Your economic model, I think, for the most part, is long-term fixed rate agreements, right? How does that economic model differ from someone who's not your customer? Do they just have massive unpredictability on that line item in their P&L?
Right. So, right now, if I asked you what the price of Henry Hub gas was, what the price of coal was today, what the price of oil was per barrel, right? You have to go look all those up. And then tomorrow it's a different number, and the next day it's a different number, and 5 years from now it's a different number.
And you got to hedge, and you got to do all this stuff with it. Yeah.
And so if you're as aggressive as you can get, and you're working with the best hedgers out there, you might get a 4 or 5 year fixed price where someone else is taking that risk and trying to make their spread on that risk. But we saw that entire market blow up. When Russia invaded Ukraine, the natural gas market around the world spiked in a way we hadn't seen in decades. And all of a sudden, Henry Hub gas almost hit $10. And so all of a sudden, every CFO at every industrial company goes, what does that mean for us?
Yeah.
How protected are we? What is the price of power? And so we saw a lot of CFOs say, look, the risk models all just showed they broke. I asked my energy guy as a CEO what the worst price of power could be, and he told me it would never get above $5 again, and I just saw $9.90. So now what's the real worst case? And so I think what you're seeing is all those industrials are aware that there's so much global interconnected risk in markets where the fuel is not free that you have to deal with that. And so if your fuel costs money, if the thing that you're burning, turning, using for movement costs money, and there's a market for it, that's unpredictability, and that's scary.
We talked a little bit about the environmental, the decarbonization, whatever. And there's some companies who are like super committed to, let's say, net zero. Others obviously want to be a good corporate citizen and do what they can. But you have the ability to go in and help customers get all the way to net zero? Maybe talk about that.
Yeah, so some of the projects that we're doing right now for factories, we're actually going to, on a monthly and on an annual basis, produce all the electricity that they consume on site on a netted basis. Now, here's the catch. We aren't always matching their load. Sometimes we're making more power than they're using. Sometimes we aren't making as much power as they're using, right? We are not perfect. We are not trying to be an off-grid solution that's perfect because that's way more expensive. But we're saying, look, if you actually want to do better and you want to get your footprint down to net zero on both a monthly and annual basis, we can now put enough renewables behind your meter for a lot of factories to do that, where you have a 20-year fixed rate, you know the price of 100% of your electricity spend for the next 20 years, and you know that it's coming from clean energy, all on site, all without market exposure or risk. It's not like you're buying power from a wind farm 500 miles away, where you still have that market risk in the middle. It's the electrons and the current flows from that wind turbine to your press, to your plastics plant, to your whatever.
If you look out over the next 5 to 10 years, what do you think the demand for on-site power is going to be? I mean, people love to have control. They love to have predictability. That's why the market's gone haywire. No control, no predictability. How do you see this play out over the next 10 years?
One of three things has to happen. Either all of a sudden the system that let the grid get as bad as it is today is going to fix itself, start building new transmission, be customer-centric, and all of a sudden be great, and utilities are going to save the day. You can take that bet, I'm not.
Yeah.
Right? Or everybody gives up, goes home, and says, we aren't doing new power, we're just going to take what we have. I'm also not going to take that bet. Or the economy says we have to find a way to do this. What are our options? And the only engineering option that works is more decentralized power. It's more 10, 20, 50, 100 megawatt facilities, powering more loads directly, operating in a decentralized way, because then the grid doesn't have to move as much power. And so all of a sudden, the existing grid that we have today can do more when you start adding decentralization, and it's getting power from everywhere and closer to where the loads are. And so I think the only answer that works for the power grid in the next decade is more decentralization, is more innovative companies that are out there like us, walking up to a customer and doing what every other industry has done for thousands of years and saying, what do you want? I'll tell you the price.
For you personally, how do you manage the complexity of all this, across the development construction? As you're scaling, as you're busier, as you have customers, how do you manage it all?
In theory, my job is to build the team who does all that. But I think what we've really seen is the hardest part is to get the middle management to help connect the dots and understand the value of the whole system, right? Because a lot of people are trained to do their part. And it's hard when you're doing your part to see the rest of the whole chessboard, so to speak, and see how the game goes from start to finish. And so we spend a lot of time teaching, young managers how to see the whole board and how to realize the value of solving an operations problem while you're in design originally, and solving a construction problem when you're talking to the customer on day one about feasibility. And so we spend a lot of time teaching engineers, analysts, project managers how to realize the value of being able to do all of that in-house. And it seems more and more like companies are more and more segregated. They do their thing and they kick it off to the next guy. And you realize when you are all of them, there's no kicking it down the road. At some point, it's your problem.
Yeah. How do you kind of foster a culture of innovation? There's so many things that are changing these days. How do you stay smart on all that stuff and really maintain a commitment to innovation? Because that's really what wins at the end of the day.
Building a culture that is so open that people are not afraid to bring new ideas to leadership is actually very hard, and it's very uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Building a culture where, when the lowest ranking person is comfortable arguing with the highest ranking person, and the highest ranking person has the respect to realize that that's a good argument, takes a lot of work. It's uncomfortable. People push back. They disagree with me. I don't just get to say what I want and have everybody do it all the time. And so that's hard for me. That's hard for our executives. That's hard for managers. It is way easier to run a dictatorship. When I was on sites doing big construction, oftentimes I was the dictator, right? What I said went, and that was it.
Yeah.
That was not a very innovative solution. We did a lot of good work, but that was not how you innovate. I don't know half of the new things coming out. And so having my team bring them up and go, why aren't we doing this? And push us and make us uncomfortable has been great.
Yeah.
One of the things that we do, Tom, is that every week, every person in the company answers 4 questions on a pink piece of paper, handwritten. The questions are, what did we do right this week? what did we screw up this week? What do we need to do better next week? And what's the single biggest threat to the company? And those handwritten answers go through their org chart. They go up to me. Eventually, I see every one. I still read every one. And that's the way of kind of forcing that communication throughout the entire company every single week to be honest about what we're doing well at and what we aren't doing well at, and to just have that reflection that's enterprise-wide. But that's an uncomfortable process, right? Sometimes you get 80 people all telling you screwed up that week in writing. I thought I had thick skin. Some of the stuff that you see in those things makes you realize that you need thicker skin, but it's what makes an actual innovative culture. It's hard to do. It's uncomfortable.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. It seems to me like there's so much opportunity, such a huge addressable market, all kinds of things you could be doing. What are like the top 1 or 2 or 3 things that you're really focused on that you think are going to move the needle with the company?
I think we're trying to figure out how to get very disciplined in what I will call a tumultuous market, where it's hard to know what's going to change tomorrow or a week from now or a month from now or a year from now. And so you're constantly forced to say, what am I so confident about now that I know nothing in Washington, nothing globally is going to change this? And it focuses you to projects that are bigger than any one industry, bigger than any one customer, bigger than kind of any one thing that could change in a world that's changing very quickly. And so, am I 100% confident that we are going to need more power off the grid for this next industrial era? Absolutely. Am I confident who those winners are or who the losers are? Absolutely not. And so try to figure out how to invest in places that give you the ability to survive the turmoil and the chaos, because that's where the opportunity is. You just don't want to get caught out on the wrong side of it. So our focus is very much right now, Tom, on kind of what are the rock solid bets that in any negative scenario still work out okay.
To quote Jereme himself here, One Power is solving the power problems that go from the point where you tie into the grid to the 4 walls of your thing, whatever that thing may be. And they have the varied and diverse customer base to back that up. Using vertical integration, economies of scale, and an unwavering commitment to innovation, they're helping power the resurgence of the American industrial heartland, one energy solution at a time. At Welcome to the Arena from ICR, we're working really hard to bring you exciting guests and great content. If you found this episode insightful, please subscribe to the show on your podcast app and leave us a 5-star rating. The more the show grows, the more interesting voices we can have on the podcast, and in turn, that should demystify a lot of the stakeholders around public companies and soon-to-be public companies. Thank you so much for listening. Special thanks to Jereme Kent, who is the CEO of One Power. He's pulling the utility industry into the 21st century, thank God, and doing some incredible things for his growing client base. This is Tom Ryan. We'll see you next time, back in the arena.
References to specific stocks are not intended to be recommendations for specific trading behavior. Comments presented on this podcast are intended for informational and educational purposes only, and do not represent opinions or recommendations on whether to buy, sell, or hold shares of a particular stock. All investors are advised to conduct their own independent research into individual stocks before making a trading decision. In addition, investors are advised that past stock performance is no guarantee of future price performance.